Sudan's schools got hit so hard that adult literacy hasn't moved since 2000. But this isn't a story about lost learning. It's about how smashing schools is how you break countries, and how that cycle starts now. Across 83 countries, documentation now confirms thousands of attacks on schools, and the numbers are accelerating. This isn't incidental violence, it's systematic. Armed groups are targeting schools deliberately. Governments are using them as military bases. The result? Entire regions where kids stop going to school because there's no school left to attend, or because soldiers occupy the building. In Ethiopia, sustained fighting in the Tigray, Amhara, and Afar regions fractured education entirely. Schools became battlegrounds or military headquarters. In Cameroon, the government and armed forces explicitly took over schools as barracks and detention centers. In Burkina Faso, at least 3 schools became military bases for soldiers during the jihadist insurgency. And it's not just Africa. Haiti, Colombia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo all report the same pattern: schools targeted, infrastructure destroyed, access cut off. The scale of this is staggering, but scale alone doesn't capture the damage. When a school gets hit, the erasure is slow and total. A generation of kids misses years of learning. They fall behind in math, literacy, job skills. By the time they hit working age, they're competing for jobs they're not qualified for. In poor regions, that doesn't just hurt individuals, it destabilizes entire economies. And that destabilization seeds the next conflict. But the attacks aren't random. They concentrate in 5 regions. See how these 5 countries cluster in high conflict zones: Ethiopia, the DRC, Colombia, Haiti, Palestine. In each one, documented attacks on schools have been sustained and severe. What links them isn't geography, it's conflict. And in every case, the longer the war lasts, the harder schools get hit. Those 5 countries share a grim logic. Armed actors treat schools like military infrastructure. Armed groups and governments aren't burning schools at random. They're using them. Schools get seized and turned into military bases, barracks, detention centers, and fighting positions. It's strategic. A school building has walls, a roof, multiple rooms, often defensible ground in a community. It's already a stronghold. And once you put soldiers inside, the education stops immediately. In Cameroon, both government forces and armed groups converted schools into barracks without negotiation. The military didn't ask. They moved in, kicked out the kids, and locked down the building. Teachers who resisted were threatened. The government even went further. They warned that any student caught singing the national anthem in a school occupied by government forces would face punishment. That's not incidental damage. That's using education itself as a weapon of control. Burkina Faso saw at least 3 schools militarized the same way. Soldiers dug in, fortified the buildings, and made them into command posts during the jihadist insurgency. Once a school becomes a military position, it's on every rival armed group's targeting list. Other fighters attack it. Artillery hits it. The building gets shelled to rubble. And kids who were already terrified now have 0 reason to believe school is safe at all. The pattern cascades. As soon as one side militarizes a school, the other side sees a military target worth hitting. The school becomes a battlefield. What was a place of learning becomes a place of fighting, and there's no quick fix to undo that damage. So who pays a price for turning schools into bunkers? International law is explicit. The Geneva Conventions say you can't target schools. Schools are civilian infrastructure. You can't deliberately attack them, and you can't use them for military purposes. But on the ground, the rules are words. Thousands of violations have been documented. Very few perpetrators have faced trial. The International Criminal Court investigates war crimes, including attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. But investigations move at a crawl. The ICC has no police force of its own. It depends on individual governments to arrest suspects and hand them over. And when the suspect is a general in your own military, most governments won't cooperate. Politicians block investigations to protect their own officers. That impunity is built into the system. In Central African Republic, a special court was set up specifically to prosecute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Good idea on paper. But soon, government-linked suspects were arrested, then quietly released. The court became a tool for settling political scores, not delivering justice. In Ukraine, thousands of alleged Russian war crimes are pending trial, but Ukraine's court system is collapsing under the load. Cases stack up. Years pass. Justice doesn't. The result, impunity spreads like infection. Armed groups see that schools get hit with minimal consequences. Governments see that militarizing schools carries no real risk, and every unpunished attack makes the next one easier. But the bigger cost isn't the buildings that burn, it's the decades of damage that follow. When schools shut down for years, kids don't just lose a year of math class, they fall behind, they drop out, they hit adulthood without the skills anyone wants to hire. In Sudan, where conflict has repeatedly disrupted schools since 2000, adult literacy rates have barely moved in 22 years. The data is stark, education stops, and adult competence stays frozen. Generations of Sudanese adults today never finished secondary school because fighting closed classrooms when they were children. Ethiopia saw the same cycle. When fighting tore through Tigray, Amhara, and Afar, it shattered schools for years. Kids who would have finished secondary school instead started looking for work. But there are no jobs for 15-year-olds with a 5th grade education. Unemployment climbs, desperation climbs, and then armed groups show up with a proposition: join us, get paid, get purpose. Thousands of young people did exactly that. Education disruption becomes a recruitment pipeline. That's the feedback loop. War disrupts schools. School closures strangle the labor market. Unemployment feeds young recruits into armed groups. Those groups prolong the conflict. The conflict keeps schools closed, and the cycle tightens. It's not a bug in how war works, it's a feature. Breaking schools breaks the future, and breaking the future breaks countries. So what's the fix? Aid organizations and UN agencies are in these countries rebuilding schools right now. They pour money into construction, new materials, teacher training for those coming back. It's necessary work, but it's also Sisyphean. In active conflict zones, rebuilding schools is like trying to fix a sinking ship. You're bailing while the hole is still open. Take Haiti. Armed gangs have taken over cities, kidnapped humanitarian workers, and shut down entire neighborhoods. Schools are closed. Rebuilding them right now is impossible. There's no security, no safe space to work, no guarantee rebuilt buildings won't get seized again tomorrow. Aid workers can't operate safely. The same problem repeats in parts of Colombia, the DRC, and across conflict zones in Africa. You can't rebuild infrastructure in the middle of active fighting without putting your people at risk. The hard truth: schools can't heal until conflicts do. Reconstruction isn't a substitute for peace, it's what happens after. And in the countries hardest hit by attacks on education, Ethiopia, Sudan, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, peace negotiations have stalled or haven't started. Without that political settlement, every school rebuilt today is just another target tomorrow. The cost of inaction keeps compounding. The children losing out right now will carry that deficit into adulthood. That's not just a tragedy for individuals, it's the architecture of state fragility. And it's already locked in motion across 5 continents. Wars break schools. Broken schools break futures. Broken futures fuel the next war. That's the cycle locked in motion. I'm David. Like this, subscribe, and we'll keep tracking these stories tomorrow.